where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. She is award-winning neurologist and doctor, no other than Miss Carolyn Taylor. Welcome to Abstract Essay, Miss Carolyn. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Certainly. Um, I am a now semi-retired physician. Practiced neurology for more than 30 years. Um, I grew up in Spring Lake, New Jersey, and uh, did my undergraduate training at the University of Notre Dame. And then I completed medical school at Hahnemann Medical College in Philadelphia. I completed my neurology residency at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So I went into general practice. I practiced in the Philadelphia suburban area for about 13 years before moving out west with my family. And since coming out here to Bellingham, Washington,
Mm-hmm. Well, Miss Carolyn, your mic was not, I think it disconnected. I cannot hear you.
okay, I don't know why.
Yes, that's it. Continue. Yes,
Is it okay now?
it's okay now. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. So I have practiced in a variety of situations. I've practiced in academic medicine. I have practiced in private practice for a period of time. I have a special interest in the treatment of multiple sclerosis. I ran a multiple sclerosis center. And then I finished out my career in Seattle, working again in a academic neuroscience institute. So during my career, I journaled all the time. Whenever I ran into a particularly difficult case or something that was very emotionally difficult for me, the way I handled it was to journal. I sat down and wrote about it. That way I took it out of my head and put it on a piece of paper. And I could go on to the next sad case and be effective because I'd left it somewhere. I compartmentalized it. And at the end of towards the end of my career, I just sat down and I read through all of the journal entries. And I was really amazed at two things. One was how I transformed over the years and how I grew in my care and treatment of patients. And mostly, I was amazed at the inspiration, inspirational nature of these stories and the people in them. You know, I remember them like they were yesterday, and they are really the true heroes of my book, which is a collection of essays of true medical essays, because they highlight what true human spirit is and the resilience and courage of some of these patients dealing with difficult to manage diseases such as ALS and multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, dementia, brain cancer. And they're really my heroes. And I wanted to share these inspirational stories with others. So I put down this collection of essays and published them.
Hmm. Interesting. Miss Carolyn, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And today, let's talk about whispers or humanizing neurology. Whispers of the mid reveals that profound rewards in your field. That the whispers of the mind is deeply poetic. What does this phrase mean to you?
That's a good question. It are the whispers are the things that are not said out loud. It is using your intuition as a physician to hear what the patient is really saying to you, um, that they're or conveying to you. They may be talking about some ordinary ailment, but deep down there's something else that's really bothering them that they want to say and want to talk about. So it's being sensitive to them and listening very carefully and trying to learn what they are really saying to you. Um, it's using more than intuition. It's using compassion as the doctor's greatest tool as opposed to technology. And I think in the world of medicine today, it's gotten very fragmented. We have so many constraints, especially in this country, with regard to electronic medical records. And most doctors today, I would say, are working in a corporate model where they are told how much time they can spend with the patient. And they have to get so much information in that electronic medical record by the end of the day. And you can easily look face to face with the patient and not type, but then you might spend 4 hours at the end of the day typing all the information that has to be in within 24 to 48 hours of your meeting. So it's gotten so much more fragmented. Doctors are looking at their computer screens, not the patient. And there's so much more to be said by making that eye contact with the patient and the value of touch with the patient and compassion and really understanding how they're feeling. I think that goes a long way towards healing than just ordering some laboratory tests and another MRI does. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, Miss Carolyn. Neurology is often seen as one of the most technical and diagnostic fields in medicine. How do you define humanizing it, and why is it so crucial?
Well, I think we help to humanize. I'm trying to humanize it with this book by telling real patient stories because I blend those stories with universal themes such as death with dignity, medical gaslighting, grief, loss, addiction. Um, and by telling human stories, I think it does a lot more to put a face behind the illness. So it's one thing to read a textbook explanation of what Parkinson's is, for instance. It's another thing entirely to see the suffering, day to day suffering of a patient that's living with the disease. And I think someone like Michael J. Fox has done that for all of us, showing us really what Parkinson's is and how much he suffers. So by humanizing a disease, I think that it helps us to connect with each other. It helps us to see ourselves in one another. And by doing that, I think that we can develop more of a sense of empathy and hope.
Yes. Empathy and hope for sure. What a personal experience or patient story first made you realize that understanding the brain requires more than just reading a scan or chart?
Say that again.
What personal experience or patient story first made you realize that understanding the brain requires more than just reading a scan or chart?
Well, there's so much more. The brain, I think of the brain as like a conduit to the rest of your body. It's like the hard drive of a computer. And then I think of the mind as our consciousness that decides what our brain is going to do. And I think of our mind as having, our consciousness as having emotions and the feelings and the motivation and desire for things, whereas the brain is what carries it out. So we look at a scan and we read a chart, and we can tell structurally how well the brain is doing. We can tell if there's atrophy. We can tell if there's been a stroke. We can tell if there's a brain tumor in a part of the brain. but it doesn't tell us how the patient is feeling and what the patient wants from you, what the patient needs. So I think you have to, we call that the mind body connection. And there's so many things emotionally that can go on with the patient. Trauma, for instance, that they might dissociate in a way that they don't remember a trauma, and yet they put it in their body somehow. There's a condition called conversion syndrome, where a patient will take a trauma, and instead of processing it on a conscious level, their subconscious will cause them to exhibit a disease. For instance, they might develop what we call hysterical blindness, or they can develop psychosomatic seizures. And they're not really blind, they're not really having electrical seizures, but they think they're blind. And the seizures to them are very, very real. It's their body and their mind really screaming out the trauma and screaming for help. So it's the whole patient is what is most important, not their scan. And they tell us in training that as a neurologist, the most critical thing that we do is take a history. And we're known for taking more detailed histories than many other specialties. We might spend most of the visit taking a detailed history and listening to the patient. And by the time you're done, before you actually examine that patient and before you get a scan and look at their brain and take laboratory tests, if you do it well, you should have a pretty good idea what's wrong with them, what you're going to find on that exam, and what you're going to look for on those laboratory tests and scans to confirm your diagnosis.
Miss Carolyn, in a field dominated by complex technology like MRIs and EECGs, how do you ensure the patient is still feels seen as a human being and not just a case study?
You need to connect with the patient. And this was a very frustrating thing for me towards the end of my career in clinical practice, because it was getting increasingly more difficult to find the time with all the bureaucratic constraints that were just suffocating you during the day, talking to insurance companies and getting all the information, the electronic records. But you need to look at the patient, you need to communicate, you need to connect with them on whatever level they're at. You need to really hear the patient. So that is, and I think that goes a long, long way in terms of healing that patient if you're going to be able to heal them. Sometimes they just need to feel validated. They just need to understand they have these symptoms and they're very real to them, and they need you to hear their symptoms and validate that there's something wrong and that their symptoms are real and that you take their symptoms very seriously.
Neurology often deals with progressive, incurable disease. How do you navigate the emotional weight of delivering a difficult diagnosis without becoming detached?
Well, I journaled, and you when you're rounding in the hospital, for instance, hospital neurology is very different from clinical neurology as with outpatients, but you might be dealing in a hospital more with patients having that you have to declare are brain dead after a trauma or an overdose. You're dealing with devastating strokes, sometimes devastating traumatic neurologic injury. And so you find when you're on that particular duty that you have to go from one sad case to another. And the only way you can do that is to somehow detach, compartmentalize, and keep your emotions out of it so you can go to the next one and be effective. At the end of the day, when I had a particularly difficult day, that would be when I would journal. I would write my feelings down. I would write down the particular case, and I would somehow try to get through it to get to the next patient. And through my life in practicing neurology, and I write about this in some of my essays. Most of my essays have to do with patient stories that illustrate a particular universal theme. But some of the essays I wrote were deeply personal essays, where I had to handle the death of three family members, all from neurologic disease, and how I managed to do that and managed afterwards to be able to go back into that hospital and deal with patients just like them with the same disease. I think what that did for me, and my first episode with that was within 2 weeks of my starting my residency training. I had to deal with the death of my mother from a medical error, actually. And it almost broke me. I almost left medicine. I definitely almost left neurology. I didn't know how I was going to go on or how I was going to deal with patients, because every older woman I saw in an intensive care unit, I saw my mother. But I think I stayed with it. I worked through my grief. It took me a long time, but I had to go back the day after the funeral. There's no time to take off and, lick your wounds. You just have to keep going. And I think in the end, that made me a more compassionate physician, because I could feel on a deeper level what the family was going through, um, and try to deal with them in as compassionate a way that I could. Understanding that the first time I talked with them, they were going to hear only part of what I said. They're only going to hear those first few negative words, that the prognosis is not good. And they're not going to hear me get to the end where I have to ask if they want to be a brain donor, a donor, not a brain donor, but um, a donor for other organs, because the patient was brain dead. And so you have to do it carefully, and you have to give them time to accept what you've told them the first time, and then come back, and then come back again, and just answer all their questions. It's time consuming, but that's what compassionate medicine is really all about. It's about using that as your main tool rather than technology. We need technology, and technology is wonderful. And we've come a long way in the years that I practiced neurology, the 30 plus years, and I'm grateful for it. But I think along the way, I think the students coming out of training right now, they're so bombarded with the technology and the lack of time, that they're not developing the physical examination skills and the compassion skills that they're going to need. And they will develop them over time, but it's a slower process, I think.
How do you prevent burnout and compassion fatigue when dealing with so much human suffering, Miss Caroline?
Burnout's a difficult thing. It's very, very hard to deal with that. And I think doctors, because of their training that is unforgiving in some ways, that it's when I trained, and things are different now, they're better. When I trained, it was, the old boys club, the old school. We did it, so you're going to do it. It doesn't matter how tired you are, how long you've been up, you just have to keep on going. And you have to come back the next day, no matter what has happened the day before. Otherwise, you're going to desert your patients, and you're going to dump on your colleagues because they'll have to pick up the slack. So I think we tend to push ourselves, and we tend to work even when we're sick. And we just have this enormous sense of duty. But I think we have to learn to take care of ourselves better. We have to learn to relax more. We have to learn to talk to one another about what we're going through. Um, Maybe get counseling ourselves if we need it. But I think basically it's a matter of taking care of ourselves. And there's a lot going into burnout right now, because we're losing physicians every day. People are retiring earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There's fewer physicians going into fields like neurology. And we have to do a better job of taking care of the students coming up the ladder. But it's still a problem.
How do you translate complex neurological terms into language that is empathic, understandable, and empowering for patients and their families?
Well, you get good at the language part because every day you're on stage with maybe just one patient and their family, but every day you're the leader, you're the one teaching them, because physicians, after all, are teachers. You're the one teaching them that they have a disease. And you learn how to put it into layman's terms. For instance, um, ALS, um, Lou Gehrig's disease, motor neuron disease. You tell them it's a nerve disease that's affecting the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is, you can think of the spinal cord as the conductor to an orchestra. And the orchestra members are the individual muscle fibers. And they all have to work in concert with each other. And the conductor has to tell them what to do. If the conductor isn't doing his job, then the muscles don't work together and they're not coordinated. And you learn to use metaphors to explain things to them. Um, I like to explain what a disease is using the fewest technical terms that I have to. I don't like to use labels that I know are going to turn them off from the beginning. I don't like to use, for instance, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. I might say you have motor neuron disease and then explain what motor neurons are, because once I use a term that has a negative connotation, they turn off and they're just in fear mode and they don't hear anything else that you say. And you also have to tell people things in the most hopeful, encouraging way that you can. Talk about the research, talk about all that can be done palliatively to make their journey less painful, to keep them alive longer, for instance. But not every disease ends in death. There's many diseases like Parkinson's disease. It's neurodegenerative, and people have this image in their mind of Parkinson's, but when you tell them about it, you can tell them about how every patient is completely different, and you can't compare one patient to another. Some people go on 10, 20 years with very little symptoms and managing a normal life. Other people might have a more aggressive course, but you always hold out the hope that they're going to have the less aggressive course. And you emphasize all that you can do for a particular disease and all the research that's going on. So you have to tell people what's wrong in the most hopeful way possible. Um, Another example would be multiple sclerosis. It used to have a terrible connotation, but today there's so much we can do for multiple sclerosis that, patients can expect, if you get to them early and diagnose them early, many of them can expect to live a normal life. And you have to get rid of those notions they had of their grandmother or their aunt or the person at work who's in a wheelchair, and that's all they see when they think of multiple sclerosis. So you have to be hopeful and positive, and you have to assure them that you're going to be there with them all along the way with their journey, helping them and taking care of their symptoms. That you're not just giving them a diagnosis and sending them home to deal with it on their own.
Miss Carolyn, how do you hope a patient or family member struggling with a neurological condition learn from your experience?
How do you help them deal with the neurologic condition?
Yes, please.
Well, you give them as much support as you can. You let them know that you're there. You schedule follow up visits. I will often, when I'm delivering a diagnosis, for instance, I will often make sure the patient comes in with a family member or a close friend, a support person, so that they hear everything I say, because the person that's getting the diagnosis is going to get emotional early on in the course of my discussion and may not hear everything I have to say. That way, and I give them plenty of time. I give them usually at least an hour, sometimes more, depending on the complexity of the disease. That way, when they go home, there's someone there that can say to them, no, she didn't really say that. You didn't hear her right. It's not as bad as you think it's going to be. And I always schedule a follow-up visit in a short period of time to answer any additional questions that they didn't think to ask me that first visit, because I know they're going to be emotional and they're going to be terrified. And then by the time they come back, they'll be a little calmer. And then we can sit down and have a longer conversation, answer more of their questions. And with each visit, I think they get more and more comfortable. I encourage support groups for my patients depending on the disease. Sometimes, if a patient is in the very early stages of a disease, and I know they have many, many good years before they're going to get into the more serious stages, I might even discourage support groups, because I know that the people in those support groups are people in the end stages of disease, and I don't want to scare them. So you have to understand where your patients are coming from. You have to understand where they are in life. And sometimes you need to refer a patient if you think that you're not the personality to help them. Sometimes patients want someone, for instance, when I was a much younger physician, I would sense sometimes that a patient wanted someone much more experienced than I was, and that they might be more comfortable with this particular diagnosis in the hands of someone that had been dealing with this disease for 20 years of their career. So you have to listen. You have to know where they're coming from to be a good judge of what they're going to need.
Listen, for sure. Listen, people.
Yes.
And Miss Carolyn, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and mental health 101 love letters in third season, and movie 101 review and music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Caroline, if you could summarize your mission in single sentence, what would it be?
My mission is not just to educate my readers about neurologic disease, but to highlight the resilience and courage of the human spirit. Because in the end, it's true stories that connect us all, and we are all we're all connected somehow. We all share common humanity.
Yes, indeed, we are interconnected as a human being. Miss Caroline, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy or any projects that you're doing right now?
Well, my book, Whispers of the Mind, was just published, and it's available at most bookstores and through Amazon. And I have a website, carolynlarkintaylorauthor.com, where you can find all that information.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Carolyn Taylor, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
More to come, people. See you soon.